You are now tuned into Flipping the Birds, a Philly Sports Network podcast.
What's going on, Eagles fans? Welcome one, welcome all to another episode of Flipping the Birds.
He's into the end zone. Touchdown, Eagles.
What's going on, Eagles fans? Welcome one, welcome all. I'm Zach Chavalala here, as always, with my guy, Eric Reese. Eric, good morning. Good extra early morning. How you doing, man?
I almost didn't get up for this. I'll be honest with you guys. Everybody in the chat right now, thank you extra today, because you guys, you're probably the reason why we're up this morning so early. Shout out to Brian. He has his baby shower today. I'm gonna be going on over there after this eventually. But yeah, dude, this is I'm ready to talk, because I was digging in, extra deep into, everything that the coaches were saying and things like that, leading into this Baltimore showdown. And man, it's going to be a close game. So it's going to be
quite
good that
possibly,
we're up early talking about it.
Quite possibly the most exciting game of the year. So it's definitely one where there's a lot to talk about. So looking into it first, obviously, right? So Eagles, Ravens, Battle of the Birds, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry. There's a lot of, I would say, almost parity in this game, right? So a lot of, real competition between an elite dual threat quarterback, two running backs, I should say, that if it wasn't for Saquon Barkley, I think everyone would be talking about Derrick Henry as far as what an amazing season he's having, right? So, Eric, when you were kind of going through all that, all that coach speak and everything such as that, and looking into what type of real competition the Eagles would be looking into this Sunday, what really stood out first and foremost?
The things that stood out were, I was looking at Lamar's numbers. We were having that conversation on Tuesday about, our top 5 candidates for MVP. And, I think we kind of discounted Lamar a little bit, since we were a little bit too focused on the running back position. I would almost put Lamar in there maybe ahead of Derrick Henry, because look at the guy's touchdown to interception ratio, just as far as him passing the ball. And we're not even talking about his running stats quite yet. It's almost remarkable how little that team seems to turn over the ball if it's in the hands of their two obviously their two top playmakers. Now the Eagles have done such a better job at that, but they've shifted it in a way where they've been run heavy. They can adjust to the pass. That's fine, but I've looked, just kind of looking at the what the coaches were saying, and look what Fangio was saying about Lamar Jackson. He said, pretty much about Lamar Jackson, he's just getting better and better at the things he was already good at. And, you're kind of wondering, in a sense, it's like, I know that the coach's game plan to stop these, these special players, but what is the plan, and how do you stop a Lamar Jackson? How do you stop a Lamar Jackson with the Derrick Henry? Also on the Eagles side of the ball, one of the things that stood out to me is there's a possibility that just in the second half alone, if you wiped away all of Saquon Barkley's first half rushing attack numbers, he would have 1,000 yards just in the second half. So that's insane to me. I don't know how often that happens.
Crazy.
But by not even by the end of the year, and you're talking about only half of games, and he's about 50 yards away from doing that. And that's insane. So we get the opportunity to sit here and watch two very special running backs, and I think two very special leaders at the quarterback position, and one person to add to all of this that I'm saying, that had a front row seat to both of those things as far as Henry and Barkley, is A.J. Brown. And he's had an opportunity to sit there and say, look, when you have your rushing attack going, you kind of have to learn your role. You kind of have to sit back a little bit. But I think we're going to see AJ Brown heavily involved, and that's going to offset a little bit of maybe not having Barkley shoulder to load against Baltimore.
Yeah, when you talk about this matchup and Lamar Jackson obviously is, I think, where the conversation starts, right? Uh, Lamar is such a unique quarterback, and as time goes on, we're starting to see those who came after Lamar. I wouldn't even say Lamar-esque quarterbacks because I feel like that doesn't do him justice, right? The Eagles haven't really faced anyone who can really be called a Lamar-esque quarterback because they frankly don't even exist. Even Jaden Daniels, right, who I think is the closest in the league, I would say, just because of that dual threat nature, right? It's really it's Jaden Daniels, it's Jalen Hurts, who the Eagles obviously would never face. Kyler Murray like a little bit, and then Josh Allen, I think are the only people, but the only one who can compare from an arm talent perspective is Josh Allen, right? So you're not even this is like a completely new uh animal in a sense for the Eagles where for Vic Fangio, this is brand new this season. You're not being able to look at like a past matchup that you had and say, well, we can definitively do X, Y, and Z, and we'll be fine against Lamar, right? He's that good. He's that talented that you're effectively right going to have to strategize conceptually and say, we're just going to throw him everything we have, and we're going to see what sticks, and we're going to have to make sure that we are adjusting mid game to what actually works. So this is the incredible challenge of facing an MVP caliber player like the Eagles are, right? But I got to say, if there's a defense who is ready to face that quality of a player, it just might be this Eagles defense, right? Now, obviously, it's that dual threat because you have Lamar, you also have Derrick Henry. But the way that the Eagles have shut down the run, even without Brandon Graham moving forward, I have a fair amount of confidence that this team can at least slow down Baltimore. I think that's what you have to look at. You have to look at slowing them down, not relying insistently on trying to stop them because they're going to get theirs. That's it. So you have to worry about slowing them down, being opportunistic. You talked about this team not turning it over that much, that being Baltimore. You got to make them turn it over, right? And even if it's just one, you just got to make it happen, right? And then offensively, you can't question what's already worked. Obviously they're a lot more run heavy, and I would say old fashioned run heavy because obviously Baltimore mixes in plenty of runs. They get plenty of yards on the ground. Lamar has more rushing yards than Jalen Hurts. Derrick Henry is second only to Saquon Barkley in rushing yards. So they get plenty of yards on the ground. But the reason that they do that, they mix it in with the passing game, right? And obviously they have explosive running plays coming from guys like Lamar, coming from guys like Derrick Henry. So what you have to do is you have to rein in that explosiveness of that rushing attack if you're the Eagles defense. And then offensively, you have to control the clock yourself. Just be you. Don't worry about, trying to go explosive play for explosive play. Philadelphia's offense is created as such so that it will eventually unlock an explosive play. You don't have to force it. And that's, I think, the important thing, in this upcoming game is that Philadelphia just be themselves. Don't force it. And I think that there's going to be a solid shot to come along and win in this matchup. But when you look at it offensively, right? You talked about AJ Brown, for instance, Devontae Smith not looking like a go in this game.
Unsure, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think that they have to do in his absence in this matchup, Eric?
They're going to have to, use that third receiver. They're going to have to try to utilize because this is a pass defense, right? That whether those numbers are skewed or not, and I don't really think that they are. This is a pass defense that Baltimore has that's been underwhelming. So you need to have the tight ends. You need to have the way to get open. You need to utilize Dotson, you need Covey, things like that. Covey, he's shifty, and he's a guy that before he got hurt this year, he proved that he can pick up those mid yards, and that's what you need because if at the end of the day, if Smith's not playing, I fully expect Brown to be double teamed. especially in against a defense where the defense has notably been burned enough times this year against elite passing attacks. Like they played Cincinnati a couple times. I know there was a lot of pass attempts in a game where you wouldn't necessarily think about Cleveland as in a passing attack, but the volume that Baltimore has had to face the pass, probably because they've been up on teams, and that's it turns into you have to throw the ball often. I think some of those numbers are skewed in a way where maybe Baltimore's pass defense is a little bit better than everybody should expect, but the ranking is the ranking, and 32nd, out of 32 teams is never going to say, well, let's give them their flowers versus, them being the worst in the league. And you rank the worst in the league, we're going to say you're the worst in the league. I think those passing plays will open, but I also think that the way that the Eagles have utilized Jalen Hurts and the number of passes that he's kind of had around the game, it's probably going to stay relatively the same. I don't know that he'll break off a huge number of passes, especially ones for deep. So I don't want to see that route tree as far as as far as running the flies and running everything deep. You got to attack the middle, and you got to attack and everything pretty much in front of the safeties. You got to play physical. This is a team that's getting to be that kind of year, like Smith said, that you kind of have to play physical, especially when you're going against these tougher teams that you might see later on in the playoffs. Let's see what this team has. I know Smith isn't going to be participating probably in this game because of the hamstring. Hamstrings are weird injuries that you don't want to make worse. So at the end of the day here, if Smith doesn't play, and that's and that's something that kind of limits what the Philadelphia Eagles can do in the air and offense. In the regular season, I'm absolutely fine with that, because there's a possibility that means that he'll have the opportunity to join the team in the postseason. But right now, I do think that in the air it's going to be those little tic tac yards, obviously, just to open up Brown when you can, and when you have the opportunity to set up something big, it's going to be because of the run. Look, the big change of pace backs, they're going to be huge in this game, because Baltimore, it's huge for Baltimore as well. You got guys like Justice Hill, pretty sure, who's the second, I guess, in command, obviously, for a guy like Derrick Henry. Gainwell's going to have a role in this too, because obviously you're going to try to be, breaking off these 5, 6, 7 yard rushes that turn into something bigger. But while you're looking for that home run shot, like as Henry and as Barkley do, you're going to be looking for these passes, and those runs, if you stick to the run, is going to open up guys who should be covered, like Brown, because Brown's a clear, we have to double this guy pretty much throughout the entire game if you're the Baltimore Ravens defense.
Yeah, and you talk about that Baltimore Ravens secondary specifically in that defense, right? And you look at the talent on that side, and you see Marlon Humphrey, you see Kyle Hamilton, you see Nate Wiggins, who has been a quality rookie despite the team's statistical standings. We'll call it. There's talent there in that pass defense, right? So I think there's a little bit. The stats are the stats. And even when you break it down to, yards per completion, yards per attempt, they're still in that lower level of teams in the NFL. So I don't think that you can say the pass defense is, you can't make an excuse like, well, it's because of the offense, how electric it is. The defense has so many more snaps on the field, which is what leads to the statistical inflation. I don't think that's the case. I think there is a little bit of that opportunity for defenses there, despite the talent that Baltimore has defensively. And that's where Philadelphia needs to take advantage. And Dotson and Covey do need to step up. That's absolutely true. Do I expect that to happen? Not necessarily in this game. More so what I'm looking for is to see the involvement of not just Dallas Goedert, but working some 12 personnel, Dallas Goedert and Grant Calcaterra.
Yeah,
That's what I'm looking to see with this offensively for Philadelphia. And I think there's some true opportunity Philadelphia has succeeded in some 12 personnel before. Obviously, it's also helped Jalen Hurts just having, because that extra tight end is not always obviously going out on receiving routes, and even if he's chip blocking on his way out, like every little bit helps kind of create that little bit of extra opportunity for Jalen in the pocket. So, if you're Philadelphia, I would not put it past them to return to a little bit more 12 personnel than we've seen in the past, just because the talent's just not really, and let's even not linger on the word talent, because I think with Jahan Dotson, I think there's a better player than Philadelphia's seen. And I don't know what the hang up is, if it's the playbook, if it's this offense, whatever it is. We've seen a better player in him before than what he's shown this year. What I will say though is that Philadelphia has leaned on that 12 personnel in years past with Jalen Hurts. The production has not been there for those additional wide receivers. I would bet a large amount of money that they're going to run a lot of 12 personnel in this game. It's just it's the sensible option, and I'm not mad at it because Grant Calcaterra has played pretty well this year. I would say even across the board. He's even expanded his game past the receiving threat. He's obviously been a better receiver. I think his blocking has improved somewhat. He's still not a great blocker. That's not his calling card. That's not why he's out there, but it has improved over previous years. And obviously, you're going to be playing through Saquon Barkley. So,
Yes.
With that in mind, I think Philadelphia does have a recipe for success. Again, it's just a matter of being able to establish that kind of dominance, because even for Baltimore's weaknesses, right? Defensively speaking of, they tend to give up explosive plays, which kind of counterbalance everything. Now, they're about middle of the pack in opponent time of possession. Philadelphia has given up the second fewest time of possession to their opponents this season, right? So again, it's going to be a numbers game for Philly. Try and stretch that even more against Baltimore so that you're seeing the control of the ball, right? That you are not only defensively, it's about denying those explosive plays, but you need to impose your will offensively over this Baltimore Ravens team. And you're going to unlock those explosive plays throughout that process, but you at the same time can't rely on that necessarily. So be methodical, work that ball down the field, lean on your stars, that being Saquon, that being AJ. And if I'm looking at the secondary, I mean, if Marlon Humphrey is going to shadow AJ Brown, I think Humphrey has a half decent chance. But listen, Nate Wiggins, and I championed him coming out of the draft. Two things. One, he's a rookie. Two, he's still rail thin. So is that guy shutting down AJ Brown? No, that's not going to happen. Now, Marlon Humphrey, obviously a bit more ready for the opportunity, but he can't do it on his own. And when you look at this safety group, I mean, Kyle Hamilton is a box safety, and I'm not trying to undermine him. Like, he's a fantastic safety. Yes, you know, Earl Thomas 2.0, whatever you want to say about that draft for Jordan Davis, but he's not going to kill the Eagles in coverage, right? So, if you're Philadelphia, you need to understand that you have an opportunity here to let AJ Brown go off, right? But the way that you're going to open up that opportunity is by establishing the rest of the field as threats. And that's when you're going to need to work in some of these other guys, talking about Dallas Goedert, talking about Grant Calcaterra, and then obviously setting the tone with Saquon Barkley.
And going back to exactly what you led off there, setting the tone with Saquon Barkley, it's not just with the run either. It's targets as well, short targets. Brown said when I believe it was just yesterday, that he actually studies Barkley in terms of yard after the catch because he's one of the better people in the whole league. So if you get him, and we saw this against the Commanders, it was pretty much a deadlock game, close game, and then Barkley had a catch that was for what was short in the air, turns around and breaks it off, and runs downfield. That's something that's an element that is not accounted for the most part when the coaches are talking about the Ravens second ranked rush defense, because okay, well, if it's the rush defense that's second ranked, what if I get him out on a screen, or where if I get him out on a wheel, or something like that, where he can break off and breaks one tackle, and next thing you know, it's 25 yards in a blink. That's something that you're thinking about as well. But you are right. A guy like Wiggins, if they are going to put Wiggins on Brown, I mean that's a matchup that you got to pick up on. If they're going to put Humphreys on Brown, that's going to be a more physical matchup for the Ravens. But I still think Brown has the edge on both of them. But Hamilton is a guy that Hurts was talking about almost specifically, and there's a lot of really good athletes, on both sides of the ball here. This is not going to be a high scoring game at the end of the day, and I do believe that if Hurts, and this is huge for Hurts, he's got to be able to read what the Ravens are going to be doing. He's got to be able to understand that. And if he sees somebody like Hamilton coming in on a rush, he's got to get the ball out of there quick, hopefully to a guy like Barkley to break that game. But the small passes and a smart time that they're kind of designed, hopefully they're being called at the right times. And I have all the faith that Moore is seeing that. Because one of the things that he emphasized, a lot of his press conferences were, we've leaned into the rush, but we know when to, we know that this is on a game by game basis, and we'll see how. And most of it was, we'll see how it plays out, but they know to update and basically, go for the pass when they need to. One of the things away from the Eagles' offense and more so on the Eagles' defense, though. That was brought up, and it was a very good point because we're talking about Lamar, we're talking about Derrick Henry, we're talking about two guys that are probably in the MVP hunt of the whole league, is how Fangio can limit, Lamar and, kind of scheme up for that. Now, Lamar's has pretty good numbers against Fangio. And that dates back to, I believe, when Fangio was also it was like New Year's. I think Fangio was the Dolphins defensive coordinator in that game, and this was 2023, so this is last year. So Lamar Jackson went 18 for 21, 321 yards and 5 touchdowns. That is absolutely insanity in terms of numbers, and there's not a lot of passes. That's still a Jalen Hurts amount of in terms of the passing attack amount of I guess a workload is a word I'm looking for there. Are we thinking that, especially without a guy like Brandon Graham now, that it actually works more in our favor to play coverage instead of blitzing a guy like Lamar Jackson and having him pick a side, because he is very efficient in run and gun, and Derrick Henry is their running back?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because there's not exactly a great spy candidate when you look at this linebacking core. The linebacking core has been fantastic this season, right? And I think that when you look at the potential candidates, you're looking at Zach Bond as potentially that threat. But even still, he's a good athlete. He's not that type of athlete, right? So that, I think that's the important thing there. When you're talking about this pass rush, honestly, it's going to be tough against Lamar, and theoretically, having more snaps for Nolan Smith, younger, sprier, faster Nolan Smith could theoretically work. This team's never going to be, and I know you're not saying this. I want to be clear that I know you're not saying this. It's never going to be better without Brandon Graham the way that he was playing. Like it's more so, well, do we change the scheme in his absence, like you were saying, right? So for trying to slow down Lamar, I think you gotta block off one side of the field, honestly, and you have to force him, try and force him down an open avenue that you're prepared for, and effectively work things out from there. Like, I'm not worried about one-on-one coverage, even without Slay. who looks like he's not going to suit up for this game. I'm not necessarily worried about these Ravens receivers. The Eagles have been one of the best teams against tight ends this season. So Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, that's the best tight end tandem in football. But even still, I'm pretty confident in the team's ability to keep them in check, I will say. So when it comes just to, settling down Lamar, I think that you block off one side of the field and then you throw the kitchen sink at him and you just see what works, because there's not a like I said earlier, like there's not a definitive like, well, we're gonna do X, Y, and Z and we're gonna shut down Lamar Jackson. Like that just doesn't happen. So, let him try and pick it up with his legs, try and block off one side of the field so that you kind of designate where he can go to from there. And this is just gonna be, flat out a tough game. One benefit the Eagles have is that they so often rush with just 4, sometimes 5. You're not throwing the entire defense in blitz packages at Lamar. And you think like, well, that's less, defenders who are around him in the pocket. Like, yeah, sure, but a lot more guys who can work prevent defense in that case, where you can really make sure that he doesn't work his way to the outside. And that's going to be the name of the game. It's just making sure that he can't bust off these big gains. So it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a hell of a game for everyone watching. But it's going to be really interesting to see what Philadelphia does. And I wouldn't be surprised actually if they were to have a player like CJ Gardner-Johnson work a bit more in the box, just kind of monitoring Lamar, because listen, he speed for speed, he's not what he once was, right? CJ, he's still quick, but he's not obviously not going to keep up with Lamar. Few guys at their best can keep up with Lamar, but I think he's someone that you can watch and you can see him kind of play that trail, almost that spy, and try and kind of keep him just in general in check. So it's going to be interesting to see what they actually roll with on the field. I think that Vic's going to kind of throw a couple different looks at them just to see what works and then just adjust through the game from there. But man, how do you game plan for Lamar Jackson? That's tough. I'm not jealous of Vic Fangio.
No, not at all. It's I'm not jealous for any defensive coordinator, but it's probably how it goes for pretty much anybody who faces the Ravens. We're talking about 2 top 5 offenses in terms of the NFL, and this is 2 teams with MVP candidates. It's going to be a tough challenge regardless. But you do bring up a pretty good point. How do you kind of contain, because they got speed at wide receiver as well. You're kind of hoping that there's a few costly drops at the end of the day too. Like, and yeah, there has been that for the Ravens. There's I would say
do they have a receiver who tends to drop the ball on Baltimore? Do they have a guy?
I'm not even talking about Nelson Aguilar. I'm not even talking about Nelson Aguilar. But yeah. I think we all notice he's on the team. It will be the most dare I say, the most Philadelphia thing from Nelson Aguilar to catch a touchdown. I don't want well, I've already said it, so let's just hope it doesn't happen, right? Anyway, but in terms of kind of like cutting off the field, if you will, and trying to limit really the entire backfield as far as Jackson and Henry, because I think that's the biggest focus here. If this goes as planned and Zach Bond, those kind of guys are getting in there, and there's 1 to 2 bodies on each thing, which is going to have to happen, by the way. I don't even think Bond, who's probably our most sure tackler on the team outside of like the defensive line, is going to bring down Henry on his own like often enough. There's got to have to be more Eagles helmets on the Ravens helmet at the end of the day. So yeah, but I would say this is probably a game where people have been saying for a long time this season, and I've agreed. Pay Bond. It's how we get when somebody is doing their job to a such a high level. Extend Bond. Well, this game could be the game where it's just like there's a real conversation to give him an extension, because he's somebody that I have circled in our depth chart on defense, where it's like, man, if anybody has to have a game here, kind of containing and help contain with as a sure tackler, because the Eagles sure as hell can't miss tackles in this kind of game. It's Zach Bond. Zach Bond is going to be huge for this game. Another guy that I want to see, I know he's probably not going to have a high snap count because he's brand new, is what's that, the Harris fella that we drafted, or not drafted,
Charles Harris, who we got on waiver from Carolina.
Yeah,
sure.
He does seem like a guy who can produce. I mean, he's had 3 sacks on the year. He's forced a fumble. I don't know if those are special teams numbers. I haven't watched Carolina except for a Carolina and Chiefs game this year. And yeah, I mean, that's I just kind of did a little bit of digging there. Obviously, as a new guy, kind of listen to what he had to say. It's pretty much just trying to learn on the fly, and that's kind of what Fangio said about him anyway. He didn't really know too much about him until the Eagles signed him off waivers. So yeah, it's just a brand new kind of meeting here. One thing that he said that sticks out though is he was questioned about the difference between Carolina and Philadelphia just on a quick observation, and then immediately he goes morale. So I think obvious. I think it's kind of there's not really anything to dive deep into there, because in my eyes maybe Carolina is kind of on the come up, and the reason why I say that is because I do see a little bit more confidence out of their offense, but they are what they are still, right? However, I mean, they give the kind of answer about morale. It's clear and obvious that would be something that's a big observation almost immediately, because he's going from Carolina Panthers, who have basically 2 or 3 wins on the year, to a team that's has playoff potential. And that's another thing that he keyed in on very quickly. So I would like to see, obviously how he goes for the rest of the season. But as far as the Baltimore game is concerned, and the people who are probably going to get more snaps after the Brandon Graham situation, it's going to live and die on probably Jalix Hunt and on rotation or with Nolan Smith.
Yeah, I would really love to see, I would say throughout the season, what a guy like Charles Harris has to provide, especially now that he's seemingly been rejuvenated by coming to a contender, a more competitive locker room. In this matchup, I think you're going to be looking at more Jalix Hunt. I think you're going to be looking at a lot of Nolan Smith, which, based on the way that he's played over the past few games, I'm excited by. And then you're going to be looking at some more Jalix Hunt from there, which I'm always ready for. Just with his approach to the game, I think Jalix can bring a lot for Philadelphia. I don't expect them to get to Lamar a ton. The Ravens, I believe, they're the 3rd lowest QB sack total, and that's their quarterback being sacked in the entire NFL. So it's going to be a challenge. That's, if you can get to Lamar, that's going to be huge for Philadelphia, because you're going to be giving Baltimore a situation that they're not accustomed to, which is their quarterback actually hitting the ground. So that is definitely going to be something key there. You did touch on something I want to bring back for a second, talking about missed tackles. Right. So in 2 areas I want to talk about this. One, Philadelphia, shockingly, because we never talk about this unless it's bad, have given up the 3rd fewest missed tackles in the NFL this season. That's incredible, especially considering the way that they started the year, because there were a couple games early on where they were still giving up missed tackles, very frustrating. But the way that Vic Fangio has rounded these guys into form, the 3rd fewest missed tackles, that's absolutely crazy. Conversely, right, when you're looking at, well, who's given up the most tackles, or the most missed tackles, I should say, across the NFL, the Baltimore Ravens are among those teams, right? And so you talked about earlier, kind of just feeding the ball to Saquon Barkley and letting him kind of operate in space and letting him work from there. That's going to be key for Philadelphia, because when you look at their receivers, I mean, AJ can make a guy miss, in the open field because of his strength, but you don't really have a shifty option, a proven shifty option. outside of Saquon Barkley. Saquon can make 5 guys miss, right, on a single play. So you're going to need to rely on that, just getting the ball in the hands of your playmaker and letting him make guys miss in the open field. And that's something that Saquon, I truly believe we can see another great game from him, even against this Baltimore team, where their defense isn't elite, but their offense, this is still a squad that is able to keep time in their own possession. This is why I'm talking about the importance of the Eagles making that claim on the time of possession, because Baltimore's offense can still methodically work it down the field if they're not getting explosive plays. So if you're Saquon, if you're this Eagles offense, you need to do everything in your power to outperform their offense in that sense, right? In that combination of uh, explosive plays, but when you're not methodically working down the field, kind of not overextending yourself, not putting yourself into a position to fail, but into a position to succeed. And the way that you do that is by putting the ball in the hands of your playmakers. And a guy like Saquon Barkley against this Baltimore Ravens team, I think it was Duck who pointed out earlier, safety group kind of suspect for Baltimore, right? Again, Kyle Hamilton, talented, but a flawed player, right? He's not the quickest, he's not the fastest, he's not a guy who can keep up in coverage. So if you're getting him and Saquon together in the open field, like, yeah, there's a chance that he's going to be able to lock in on Saquon and lock him down. I give the advantage to Saquon though to be able to shake Hamilton flat off and bust another big game. He had 270+ yard gains in this last game, and you got to figure that Saquon's probably getting a little bit tired at this point in the year. But at the same time, he's never played this freely before, Saquon Barkley. And if you watch him talk about the game, it seems like he has a brand new energy for it. So I know there's a lot of concern about, well, we got to limit, the touches for Saquon and this and that. And listen, do that against these deceased division rivals that the Eagles are playing the rest of their schedule against. Like, you don't need to do that against Baltimore. Like, this is a game, and there's been talk about not that it's a scheduled loss or anything like that, but that the Eagles could lose this game and it would actually be good for them, in the sense that they could rally around after the fact. But here's the problem with that. How often last season was the conversation like, oh yeah, the Eagles have won a lot of games, but who have they beaten? Right? You look at it this season. If they lose this game to Baltimore, who have they beaten? Now the Rams game was encouraging, but that's still a 500 team. Like,
Right.
That's not a world beater, right? Who have they beaten? Well, they've beaten the Packers. The Packers have been the most inconsistent, successful team in the
Week
entire
1
league,
games don't count for the long scheme, by the way.
especially in Brazil.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you're looking at this schedule, and and I'm not doubting Philadelphia's skill, I'm not doubting their talent. Don't take it as me not believing. It's just merely pointing out that if you want to avoid that narrative of, well, who do they beat? Well, they have to beat good teams that come across their schedule. Who is the only truly good team on the Eagles' schedule this season? That's the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, I think the Tampa Bay Bucks would have counted had Chris Godwin stayed healthy, had Mike Evans not missed, almost half the year. They're still a fine team, and they whooped the Eagles. Like, don't get it twisted there. Like, that's not forgotten. But when you're talking about teams that are, I would say, around the Eagles' power ranking spot, their point in the conversation, they're not playing Buffalo. They're not playing Detroit. They're not playing Kansas City, who's admittedly a little fugazi. But, you're not playing those teams. You know who you are playing? The Baltimore Ravens.
Yes.
So that's the game that you have to take care of, that you have to go out there. And you can say the Steelers like later on, but
I mean, if you're
really
going to say the
believe
Kansas
in the
City Chiefs are
Steelers?
fugazi, I think the Steelers are also a little fugazi. So
Exactly. So it's tough to believe in a team led by Russell Wilson in 2024. And he's done well since getting there. The team itself has obviously done well. Game against the Browns, kind of a nightmare scenario, but listen, divisional games can be like that sometimes. And against famous Jameis Winston, I mean, listen, that man was sent by the Lord, if you ask him. So it's just there's not much you can do in that case.
He's one of those players that like marvels me, just Jameis Winston. I'm just like, dude, he's like we've all watched his career, right? He has one game where he puts up like a 50 burger with his team, and then like followed by 2 or 3 games where it's just like I can't believe he's Jamarcus Russell. You know, like it's like he has that kind of aura to him, but while he's Jamarcus Russell, he's winning. I'm just like this doesn't make any sense. I don't know. I think the Browns are the perfect team for him. I think you might resurrect the Browns in Cleveland.
He doesn't want to go anywhere, and it's really interesting because there's still so much money tied into Deshaun Watson, right? And I wonder, when those. I think the contract's fully guaranteed, so it's not even like you can enter. Like you can't do what the Giants did and lose, or earn back some of that money that's non-guaranteed later on down the contract of Daniel Jones for them, Deshaun Watson for Cleveland. So I guess at best, I don't even think he would renegotiate so that he would give up money to earn his release. So for Cleveland, you're just going to have an expensive Deshaun Watson sitting on the bench. You can't play Deshaun over Jameis, even if you're trying to be competitive. And this is even that Jameis has been fantastic. I would say like 1 out of every 3 games, and he's been pretty good, outside of that. This is not a guy that you can believe in as a franchise cornerstone, though. So, it's really funny. The guys obviously love playing with him. The team has had success. He is now a Cleveland Brown player since he's beaten the Pittsburgh Steelers. By his own metrics, that's the qualification. So I don't know. It's a really interesting situation. But again, all that just to say that when you're talking about like a divisional game, especially with a team that is as uneven as the Cleveland Browns, anything can happen. So I don't necessarily hold that loss against the Pittsburgh Steelers, but admittedly, as you alluded to, they are there's something about them that doesn't feel right. And I think a lot of that
feel
is
threatened by them, and I know they're on a schedule, and people are like, "Oh, look out for the Ravens," or not look at the Ravens. Look out for the Steelers. I'm just like, yeah, okay. I mean, in the same way that we looked out for the Rams, really, I feel.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just about who's under center and the ticking time bomb that is George Pickens. Like I'm not concerned about either of those. I think George Pickens might get thrown out of a game if he's going up against Kenyon Mitchell, if I'm being honest. I think he'll just get so flustered and frustrated that he'll do something worthy of being ejected from the game. So I'm not worried about Pittsburgh.
Well, to that point, it's kind of funny that you brought that up, because if that were to happen and it went both ways and like Kenyon had to go with him, and that when that game does happen and if that scenario does come up, to that point, ironically, I do think that the Eagles have decent corner depth. So when you still kind of look at that, if one of those players, something happened, I know Slay, like you mentioned, touched on earlier, is not going to be playing this week. I look at the corner depth when he's out, and obviously Quinyon's in. So the point that we were just talking about for the Ravens game is, it's moot. But you do have the depth to take over for Slay. So my thing is, I still think the Eagles' defense, as far as the backfield, is potent. Now the safeties, they are what they are, but the same thing can be said for the Ravens. I think the Ravens have better safeties in terms of kind of maybe in terms of like tackling.
Yeah,
And
I mean Reed
coverage.
Blankenship has sex appeal, and
He has turnovers. Also, Johnson has turnovers. So
Yeah,
that's really it.
exactly.
At the
They
end of the
they
day.
kind of both do, but I think you're right. I think Kyle Hamilton alone makes that safety group better for Baltimore than it is for Philly, and it's not like neither of them are great. It's just that one's better than the other.
Yeah, that's mostly it. Like it's not like that it's a huge standout difference. I mean, we are still sitting here saying, I would probably rather have Kyle Hamilton, and we're talking about a safety on a 32nd ranked passing defense. So right, at the end of the day here. But I'm away from the safeties, I think the corners, in Philadelphia are it's not even a comparison. I think, you have a better situation as far as Philadelphia, and I mean, you want to talk about the guys that are drafted recently, Mitchell over Wiggins. I remember having the worst take of them all in hindsight, with but we won't even discuss that. Because in hindsight, oh boy, was I wrong. I just really like the gimmick, but at the end of the day, here we were definitely sitting there saying we wouldn't be mad if it was Wiggins. Well, it's not Wiggins, and Philadelphia ended up getting not only Mitchell but Cooper. So that's a tandem where, in hindsight, from these sort of
they're a
games
little
here,
good. They're a little
yeah,
good, those guys.
we maybe they shouldn't be so good so quick, but I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, they need to develop more. Like, if they're developed, here they are, right? So and there's more to develop, obviously. They're still rookies. But this is great. This is a great, kind of track and road to be on as far as their quickness to develop in 12 weeks, 13 weeks. So yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see how they compare against, obviously, an attack that Baltimore has. It will be a very good challenge. And I think this pretty much goes back to setting the tone for the Eagles defense as the postseason arrives, and maybe a little bit for the Baltimore Ravens as well. They probably look at the same way as the Philadelphia Eagles. But in terms of this game, is there anything that stands out in terms away from, I guess, really away from the offense and the defense, like the intangibles?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about intangibles, like there's obviously so many different ways that you can kind of go with that conversation. For Philadelphia, it's all about keeping the main thing, and making sure that you're managing that turnover battle, right? You talked about Baltimore and how successful they are in not turning over the ball, and Philadelphia, to their credit, as you also pointed out, they've done a lot better lately at preventing giveaways. That's what you have to make sure that you are continuing to do, in this matchup, because you know we talk about the defense being the 32nd defense. This is the Ravens defense, obviously, that I'm talking about. Being the 32nd ranked defense in all of football, and then you look at that from a turnover perspective, and I think they're tied. Well, they're in the bottom 10 for turnovers produced, Baltimore, right? So there's not I guess the best way to put it, there's not like an inherent fear of turning the ball over against this team. So what you have to watch out for is that you don't relax, right, and then fall into a situation where you force unforced turnovers, right, where you put the ball in a bad position, and all of a sudden you're giving Baltimore an edge that they don't normally have, right? You need to make sure that this weakness of their game, which is not being able to take the ball away, you need to make sure that that does not become a strength for them, right? You need to make sure that you're not giving them any extra advantage that they don't normally have. And then conversely, when you look at this defense, like, again, it's about trying to force turnovers yourself. That, like, this, you're not going to get um you'd be hard pressed to get multiple turnovers out of this Ravens defense. But if you can get one, especially if you can get a second, that could very well prove to be the game just right there.
Yeah, in terms of that, staying with the turnover theme, really. First and foremost, I guess really before the turnovers, it was a very good point brought up in the chat earlier. It's about getting ahead early. This is one of those games. I mean, as long as the competition stays steady, you got to get ahead of this. Yeah, Jonathan Harvey. As far as getting that first quarter touchdown, it hasn't happened often. Maybe once, maybe twice this year. Hasn't happened often. When Philadelphia, kind of gets ahead, it gives you that little bit of confidence in watching the game and sitting there saying maybe it's easier to navigate. Now, not all hope is lost, because clearly, look at the record, look at the way that the philosophy goes for the Philadelphia Eagles. in terms of how as the game goes on, they're opening up these bigger runs really because they're wearing down the defense. So really, the Eagles are essentially a second half team, and they exploded in the second half. But in the first half, if you can kind of start to get ahead or not fall behind was really what you want to kind of be, especially against the Ravens because they're explosive. That's huge, and that's a big mental edge. For a team that and this is like I think by the time I was done watching these press conferences, is a very tired story here, but it was like how they were asking these reporters, they were asking Jalen Hurts how they feel about in terms of him and in terms of the Eagles about being like 32nd or ranking 32nd in pass attempts and having the first ranked rush attack, and the answer was simple. I think it was posed to Kellen Moore as well. It's like, well, you look at the record, or maybe it was Nick Sirianni. He's like, if you look at the record, our philosophy has been working and it's been, it's doing well. So it really doesn't matter about, how you get to a win. It matters that you win. And that was the perfect answer because, again, the turnover battle here, they're taking care of the ball. Hurts isn't turning the ball over because sometimes, quite frankly, it's not in his hands enough to turn the ball over. And that was something at the beginning of the year I felt, that was pretty obvious with the fumbles, with some interceptions that he was forcing. If you're limiting that option against better teams, then you're not going to have it pretty much on the table as much. That just goes, in terms of volume and a possibility where it might be problematic. Do I think Hurts has improved in that aspect, regardless? Absolutely. I think that he's become a smarter quarterback as the season's gone. I think he's complemented fantastically by the weapons he has in offense. And I do believe that the philosophy, of maybe not starting out so quickly, but wearing down the defense is going to open up a lot more things for a guy like Barkley, especially against a number 2 ranked, rushing attack. Like, you just can't abandon the rush attack because of how good on paper, how good against other teams, a team has been in that aspect of the game. So yeah, there is a part of this mental aspect. There's a part of this, idea of how you approach turnovers as a philosophy, but there's also a part of, there's a resilience factor. And I think the Eagles have that. I think the Ravens have it too. But in terms of what we know about the Eagles and what we've seen on the whole, for what works, I don't see why it can't work against the Ravens. I just think that there's going to be a little bit of a different approach maybe in the first half, and then the second half it's going to be more of, I think, the same. I think situational football obviously will have a say, but at the end of the day here, in the second half, we're going to sit here and, I mean, the numbers speak for itself when we brought it up earlier about Barkley. We're going to see Barkley in the second half, probably getting the ball often, and that's our true game breaker in terms of, what the personnel that we have going into this game. Now, if Smith does play, that will be great. I don't see it happening. I wouldn't really want it to happen if he's not 100%. But yeah, nonetheless, though, I do think that the team as a whole is still a dangerous, dangerous personnel that they're putting on the field on offense, and they're just as dangerous, I feel, on defense, because if you look at the defense in the last number of weeks, they're pretty fantastic at creating turnovers. You have to score on those turnovers too. So taking advantage of all that stuff kind of as a whole is what's going to separate Philadelphia from great teams, and starting with the Ravens.
Yeah, I kind of feel like there's only so much that can be, litigated back and forth as far as, this game, because so much of it is going to have to be about how you adjust, right? There's obviously going to be a game plan going into the game, but when you're working against an offense that kind of just beats to the tune of Lamar's drum, it's you're going to have to learn how to adjust. A guy like Jaden Daniels, who again was like the closest comparison the Eagles have faced this season to Lamar, from an ability to trying to think about a better word than what we use for our group chat at PSN. Who's able to adjust mid play, right, and an ad lib, and effectively stretch plays into much bigger gains just off his legs. That's gonna cause your defense to have to adjust throughout. So a lot of it, we're just gonna have to see if Vic Fangio and this team are able to adjust defensively, and then offensively, I think that's where we've kind of aligned. Like, you have your playmakers, you have your strategy and set. That's to play through your playmakers. Saquon first and foremost. Just trust the process, as it were, and play through them and see where it goes from there. But we've reached, I think, everyone's favorite moment in the pod.
It's not mine anymore. It's everybody's.
Well, it's everyone's because they love it when you choose the other team. But
right.
we're now going to talk some predictions. So,
Yes.
Eric, first and foremost, what is your prediction for the final score of this game?
Oh my God. All right. So, like I said earlier, I don't think it's going to be a high scoring game. And that does kind of like take away from both offenses, which are fantastic offenses, right? But I do see, a more balanced offense on the Ravens, personnel wise, or whatever. Even at best, entering this game, I would give the edge on offense to the Ravens. Defensively, there's some personnel loss on the Eagles, but they have a better defense overall, and I still think that's true. So when I say not high scoring, I mean like a game that's not going to have over 30 points for one side. So yeah, I mean I do 24-21. It's going to be close. It's going to be not that really high score. I mean, I guess mid range. I guess is probably a better way to put that. I am going to side with the Ravens on this one. So 24-21 Baltimore Ravens. I think as far as a regular season showdown, that's how it goes. I look at the Eagles having a little bit more adjustments to make with their personnel, and I think they'd get better by the end of the year with the personnel that they have. So it's not the end of the world if you do drop this game. But I don't think it's a scheduled loss by any means. I don't believe in that as far as a team that's looking to test wits against another playoff team if they're pushing for a playoff berth themselves. But just I do believe here that the Ravens are more equipped to win this game, and I know, right, it kind of goes right with the Vegas odds too, because the Ravens are the favorites to win this game, not by much. So yeah, I mean 24-21. Baltimore Ravens. We're hoping for a Justin Tucker to miss a few field goals. Let me just put it like that. So,
yeah, I think that we can expect this to be a hard-fought game. I think you're right, obviously, that Justin Tucker has not been Justin Tucker this season, right? But when you look at how the Ravens have played so far this season, their losses coming against Pittsburgh, coming against Cleveland, coming against Kansas City, that's really tough in the sense of those are two division games and the Kansas City Chiefs, right? When you're looking at those losses. So what I mean by that effectively is that this team, not anyone can just go in and beat the Baltimore Ravens. There's the Oakland Raiders, well, not even the Oakland Raiders, the Vegas Raiders. That game was truly an anomaly. I don't even know what happened. That feels like it was a lifetime ago. That was so early in the season. So the point is that it's going to be an incredibly tough matchup for Philadelphia, especially since the Ravens, I feel, aside from those division games, which I again, like you talk about any given Sunday, I mean, that's especially true in a divisional matchup. I still have faith that Philadelphia is going to be able to win this game on the back of Saquon Barkley. I agree that it's not going to be the highest scoring as in no one breaking 30. And I have the game ending 28-24 Eagles.
all right. So we're splitting this one. What I'll do on social media is I'll put up a predictions thread if anybody wants to go ahead and post their predictions. We'll share. We'll talk about that, all those things. But tomorrow, 4:25 kickoff. What's this? What's that slot called? The America's Game of the Week or whatever it is. That's normal what they call it.
Oh yeah, if it's on Fox, I think it is. Yeah.
If it's on Fox, that's what it is. So here it is, man. The battle of battles, the war of wars, the running back of running backs, and that sort of duel there, and dare I would normally say the quarterback versus quarterback duel, but in a way that they had the similarities, I guess that fits still. So yeah, I mean, tomorrow 4:25, we're watching a game that could set the tone for each team going into the postseason. So while it is a very important game, I don't think it kills the buzz for any one of those teams to take an L. But at the end of the day here, somebody's got to win, right? And if it does end in a tie, I don't think it can end in a tie anymore. I don't know what the rules are like McNabb anymore. So here we are. By the way, just real quick, that college football game that went to 8 overtimes. Did you see any of that?
No, I didn't see any of that.
I just think that maybe Georgia, it's not that impressive when you have to beat look, I don't know college football, but when you have to beat a lesser team by going into 8 overtimes and you're the favorite. I don't know that you should be, jumping up in the rankings like that. I think it's kind of something where it's like, well, you struggle just as much as the other team that was heavily. You should
basically lose brownie points for each overtime that it goes into.
I feel like they should switch it up too, where it's like, okay, in a second overtime can only be 2-point conversions. If you get the 8 overtimes, offensive linemen versus defensive linemen and fade routes. That's what it should be. So
yeah, for sure.
Anyway, back to the game real quick. Tomorrow 4:25. Birds.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you so much for sticking with us today, for listen to us blather on about the Birds, but obviously tomorrow's the game itself should be an enjoyable time, even if it doesn't end the way that Eagles fans want, which, judging by our split decision, obviously is a possibility. But for now, thank you so much for tuning in, especially in Brian's absence. He has very exciting things going on today, so he had a very good reason for missing today's pod, but he will be back on Tuesday. But for now, thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share this pod as well. I've been Zach Chavalella, here with my guy Eric Reese. This has been another episode of Flipping the Birds.
Go Birds! Flip.